Imagine spending your entire life believing one of Christianity's most important teachings, only to discover that one of Judaism's oldest surviving books never describes it the way you expected. Millions of Christians speak about the second coming of Christ. It's preached from pulpits, depicted in paintings, described in countless books, and discussed whenever the topic of the end times arises. Yet when you open the Book of Enoch, something surprising happens. The phrase, "second coming," never appears. Not once. Instead, Enoch introduces someone with many different titles. The Son of Man, the Elect One, the Righteous One, the Chosen One, a heavenly figure whose authority stretches beyond kings, beyond angels, and ultimately, over the judgment of the entire world. For centuries, readers have asked a fascinating question. Is this describing the same event Christians later called the Second Coming? Or is Enoch describing something different altogether? Tonight, we're going to find out. Before we can answer that question, we need to understand something almost nobody explains. The Book of Enoch was written during what historians call the Second Temple period. Long before the New Testament existed, Jewish writers were already asking profound questions. How would God finally judge evil? Who would establish perfect justice? Would Israel's suffering ever end? What would happen to corrupt rulers? What would become of the rebellious angels? The answers they explored created the intellectual world into which Jesus himself was born. That doesn't automatically make every part of Enoch inspired. Nor does it make every later interpretation correct. But it does make the book historically significant. For many centuries, the Book of Enoch disappeared from most Christian Bibles. Yet it was never completely lost. The Ethiopian Church preserved it. Fragments were later discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. Those discoveries confirmed something remarkable. Large portions of the book already existed centuries before Jesus. That means when Jesus spoke about the Son of Man, his audience already lived in a world where that title carried enormous expectations. But were those expectations the same as modern ideas about the Second Coming? Not necessarily. And that's where our investigation begins. Here's the mystery. Most people imagine the Second Coming as someone leaving heaven, returning to earth, and beginning judgment. But that's not how Enoch first introduces the heavenly figure. When we finally meet the Son of Man, he doesn't arrive as someone trying to gain authority. He already possesses it. Already knows the secrets of heaven. Already stands before God. Already has a role in the final judgment. That single detail changes the entire discussion. Because perhaps the biggest surprise hidden inside the Book of Enoch isn't when this figure appears. It's who he already is before the judgment even begins. To understand why Enoch presents the Son of Man this way, we have to travel even further back. Centuries before Enoch, another Jewish prophet received a vision. One that would become the foundation for everything that follows. Daniel saw someone coming with the clouds of heaven. And what happens next may completely change the way you read the Book of Enoch was written. An elderly Jewish exile recorded one of the most mysterious visions in the entire Hebrew Bible. His name was Daniel. Jerusalem had fallen. The temple had been destroyed. God's people were living under foreign empires. Babylon, Medo-Persia, and eventually Greece. To many Jews, it looked as though evil had won. Would these kingdoms rule forever? Would justice ever come? Would God intervene? Daniel's vision answers those questions. But not in the way anyone expected. Daniel's vision begins not with heaven, but with chaos. For monstrous beasts rise from the sea. Each represents a powerful earthly kingdom. Different in appearance. Different in strength. Yet all sharing one thing in common. Power built upon violence. Power that crushes. Power that exalts itself above God. For centuries, Jewish interpreters understood these beasts as human empires. Kingdoms rise. Kingdoms fall. History repeats itself. But then, everything changes. Suddenly, Daniel's attention shifts. From earth to heaven. He sees the Ancient of Days. Not a king elected by men. Not another empire. But God Himself. Seated upon a throne of judgment. His clothing white as snow. His hair pure like wool. His throne burning with fire. Streams of fire flow before Him. Thousands upon thousands attend Him. The court is seated. And the books are opened. This is no ordinary vision. It is the heavenly courtroom. History itself is about to be judged. Then comes one of the most important verses in all of biblical literature. Daniel writes, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. Notice something remarkable. This figure is not rising from the sea. Like the beasts. He comes with the clouds of heaven. Throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, clouds are closely associated with the presence and majesty of God. Already, Daniel is drawing a sharp contrast. The kingdoms of this world rise from chaos. But this figure comes from heaven. Daniel continues. The Son of Man approaches the Ancient of Days and is presented before Him. Then something extraordinary happens. He receives dominion, glory, a kingdom, authority over all nations, every people, every language. His kingdom will never be destroyed. This is the first time in Jewish scripture that a human-like heavenly figure receives everlasting dominion over the nations. And it leaves us with a profound question. Who is He? For centuries, Jewish readers debated Daniel's meaning. Some believed the Son of Man represented faithful Israel. Others saw Him as a heavenly representative of God's people. Still others expected a coming messianic deliverer. Whatever conclusion they reached, one thing was clear. Daniel's vision became one of the most influential prophetic passages in Jewish history. By the time the Book of Enoch was written, this vision had already shaped generations of expectation. And Enoch does something remarkable. He doesn't replace Daniel's vision. He expands it. The mysterious figure Daniel introduces only briefly becomes one of the central characters of the Book of Enoch. This is where many modern readers make a crucial mistake. They assume Enoch invents something entirely new. But the evidence suggests something different. Enoch begins with Daniel's vision. Then develop it. He asks questions Daniel never answers. Who is this Son of Man? Where did he come from? Up to this point, Daniel has given us only a glimpse. A mysterious figure appears before the Ancient of Days, receives everlasting authority, and disappears almost as quickly as he arrived. But when we arrive at the Book of Enoch, that mystery suddenly becomes the center of the story. The section known today as the Parables of Enoch contains one of the most detailed portraits of this heavenly figure anywhere in ancient Jewish literature. Here, he is no longer simply one like a son of man. He received several titles: the Son of Man, the Elect One, the Righteous One, the Anointed One. At first glance, they seem like different individuals. But as the narrative unfolds, they are describing the same mysterious person. Then Enoch records something that has fascinated scholars for generations. The Son of Man is not introduced as someone suddenly appearing at the end of history. Instead, he appears as someone already known, already chosen, already present within God's heavenly purpose. Listen carefully. The text says this figure was hidden until the appointed time, not created at the last moment, not discovered unexpectedly. Hidden, waiting, prepared for the day when God would reveal him openly. That language immediately raises an important question. Hidden. From whom? Enoch describes history unfolding beneath heaven. Kings establish kingdoms. Empires rise. The righteous suffer. The wicked appear to prosper. Generation after generation, human beings believe they control history. Yet according to Enoch, another reality exists beyond human sight. While earthly rulers fight for temporary power, God has already appointed the one who will judge them all. The timing belongs entirely to God. Not to kings. Not to nations. Not even to the angels. Notice something unexpected. The parables spend surprisingly little time describing battles. Instead, their attention focuses upon judgment. Again and again, the kings of the earth, the mighty, powerful, are summoned before God's throne. Not because they belong to a particular nation, but because of what they did with the authority entrusted to them. They were oppressed. They corrupted justice. They rejected righteousness. They trusted their own power instead of God's. The central question is never, how powerful were they? The question is, were they righteous? This is one of the biggest surprises in the Book of Enoch. Modern discussions often focus almost entirely on fallen angels, Nephilim, or hidden mysteries. But Enoch repeatedly returns to something much simpler: justice, faithfulness, righteousness. The coming judgment is not presented as random destruction. It is portrayed as the restoration of moral order. The wicked are judged. The righteous are vindicated. The oppressed receive justice. The corrupt lose the authority they abused. This theme appears again, and again, and again. This is where modern readers often miss something important. Many assume Enoch invented these ideas. But when we compare the text carefully, we find something different. Daniel already spoke about everlasting dominion. Isaiah spoke about God's coming judgment. The Psalms celebrated the day when the nations would finally answer before God. Enoch gathers these themes together, expands them, and places the mysterious Son of Man at the center of God's final justice. Rather than replacing Scripture, Enoch is participating in an ongoing Jewish conversation about how God's promises would one day be fulfilled. Now we arrive at the question that has divided readers for centuries. Who exactly is this Son of Man? Was Enoch describing a future Messiah? A symbolic heavenly representative? A figure representing God's faithful people? Or someone else entirely? The text itself does not stop to answer modern theological debates. Instead, it simply describes what this figure does. He judges. He reigns. He vindicates the righteous. He defeats evil. He establishes justice. Only centuries later would followers of Jesus begin reading these passages in light of his life, his death, and his resurrection. But before we compare those texts, there is one more discovery hiding inside Enoch. One detail that changes the entire discussion. Because according to Enoch, this heavenly figure was not merely waiting. He was known before the world ever reached its final hour. By the time Jesus began his public ministry, the Book of Enoch had already been circulating for generations. It was not part of every Jewish community. Not everyone accepted it. But its ideas, especially those found in the parables, had become part of the religious conversations of the age. People were asking, who would judge the nations? Who would overthrow evil? Who was the mysterious Son of Man Daniel described? These were not new questions. They had been discussed for centuries. Then, Jesus entered history. And almost immediately, he began calling himself the Son of Man. One fact surprises many readers. Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man more than any other title. Far more often than Messiah. Far more often than Son of God. Again and again, he says, the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. The Son of Man must suffer. The Son of Man will come in glory. Why? Why choose this title over every other possible description? To answer that, we have to listen carefully to his audience. When first-century Jews heard Son of Man, their minds did not begin with modern theology. They began with Daniel. Some may also have remembered the expanded portrait preserved in the Book of Enoch. A heavenly figure, chosen by God, associated with judgment, given everlasting authority. Whether every listener accepted Enoch is another question. But the language itself was already rich with expectation. Jesus steps directly into that world and fills the title with even greater meaning. One moment captures this more dramatically than any other. During his trial, the high priest demands an answer. Jesus responds with words that shocked the entire courtroom. He says, "From now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." Notice what Jesus has just done. He has woven together imagery from Daniel's vision, clouds, authority, the Son of Man. The heavenly courtroom. Whether or not his listeners agreed with him, they immediately understood the claim. The reaction was explosive. The high priest tore his robes and accused him of blasphemy. Here we need to be careful. Some people claim this proves Jesus was directly quoting the Book of Enoch. Others insist he referred only to Daniel. The evidence is more nuanced. Jesus unquestionably draws upon Daniel. That much is clear. Whether he also intended his audience to recall themes familiar from Enoch is a question scholars continue to discuss. What cannot be denied is that all of these texts belong to the same intellectual world. They share language, imagery, expectations, and questions about God's final victory. Now another surprise emerges. When modern audiences hear Second Coming, they often imagine only one event: Christ returning. But both Daniel and Enoch focus repeatedly on something larger: judgment, the vindication of the righteous, the overthrow of corrupt power, the establishment of God's eternal kingdom. The appearance of the heavenly figure is inseparable from the restoration of justice. That emphasis runs through the entire Book of Enoch. This changes how we should read Enoch. The book is not primarily trying to satisfy modern curiosity about the end of the world. Its greatest concern is moral. How long will injustice continue? Will evil rulers escape forever? Does God remember the righteous who suffer? Will heaven ever set things right? The answer Enoch gives, again and again, is yes. Justice is coming. But one final comparison remains. Centuries after Enoch, and decades after Jesus' resurrection, another exile received a vision. Its symbols are different. Its imagery is breathtaking. Yet hidden beneath its pages are echoes that many readers have overlooked. Did the final book of the Bible preserve some of the same expectations found centuries earlier in the Book of Enoch? The answer may surprise you. Of God. Yet the Book of Revelation does something neither Daniel nor Enoch had fully done. It gathers centuries of prophetic imagery and presents it as one grand vision. The question is, does it describe the same event Enoch foresaw? Perhaps no passage has shaped Christian understanding of the second coming more than Revelation chapter 19. John sees heaven opened. A rider appears on a white horse. He judges with righteousness. He defeats evil. The nations tremble. The kingdoms of the world collapse before him. For many Christians, this is the definitive picture of Christ's return. But notice something remarkable. The focus is not simply his arrival. The focus is judgment, justice, the defeat of evil, the establishment of God's kingdom. Those themes should already sound familiar. When we place these texts beside one another, clear similarities emerge. Daniel describes a heavenly ruler receiving everlasting dominion. Enoch expands that portrait, showing the Son of Man judging kings, vindicating the righteous, and bringing justice. Revelation describes Christ defeating evil, judging the nations, and establishing God's eternal reign. The language is different. The imagery develops. But the central hope remains remarkably consistent. God's justice will prevail. This is where sensational claims often begin. Some videos insist the Book of Enoch predicted Revelation word for word. Others claim there is no connection whatsoever. The evidence supports neither extreme. What we actually find is a shared world of ideas. Jewish apocalyptic literature often uses similar symbols. Clouds, heavenly courts, books being opened, angelic hosts, final judgment. These images appear across multiple writings. Not because one copied another mechanically, but because they belong to the same tradition of hope. Now, we arrive at the most important discovery in this investigation. The title of this documentary asks, what returns? Many people expect the answer to be simply Jesus. But Enoch's emphasis is broader than that. What returns is God's righteous rule, justice, perfect judgment, the authority heaven intended from the beginning. The heavenly king does not merely appear. He restores what rebellion, violence, and corruption had broken. That is why the downfall of wicked rulers receives so much attention throughout the book. This is not merely about arrival. It is about restoration. From Genesis to Daniel to Enoch to the Gospels to Revelation, one great story unfolds. Human rebellion, divine patience, coming judgment, final restoration. The details differ. The imagery grows richer. But the direction remains the same. History is moving toward God's justice. That is the thread connecting these writings across centuries. Perhaps this explains why Enoch spends so little time satisfying human curiosity. He is less interested in dates than in readiness, less interested in speculation than in righteousness. The coming judgment is never presented as entertainment. It is presented as certainty. That message echoes throughout the scriptures. We've now reached the end of our investigation. We've followed the evidence. From Babylon to Second Temple Judaism to the ministry of Jesus, and finally to the Book of Revelation. So now we can answer the question we asked at the beginning. Did the Book of Enoch describe what Christians today call the Second Coming? The answer is both yes and no. Yes, because Enoch unquestionably describes a future moment when God's chosen heavenly ruler appears openly, judges the wicked, vindicates the righteous, and establishes perfect justice. Those themes strongly resemble what Christians later understood as Christ's return in glory. But also, no. Because Enoch never uses the phrase Second Coming. Nor does he present the complete New Testament picture that later Christian theology develops. That language belongs to a later stage of biblical history. Understanding that distinction is important. Not because it weakens Scripture, but because it allows every text to speak in its own voice. What we actually discover is something far more interesting. Daniel plants the seed. Enoch develops the expectation. Jesus identifies himself with the Son of Man. Revelation presents the victorious Messiah. bringing God's purposes to completion, rather than competing with one another. These writings belong to an unfolding conversation, stretching across centuries. Each speaks from its own historical setting. Each adds another layer. Each asks and answers different questions. Perhaps the greatest surprise was never about chronology. It was about emphasis. Modern discussions often become consumed by timelines, dates, predictions, signs, speculation. The Book of Enoch does something very different. Its greatest concern is righteousness, justice, faithfulness under suffering, the certainty that evil will not reign forever, that corrupt power will one day answer before God, that the faithful will not be forgotten. Those themes stand at the very heart of Enoch's message. Whether someone ultimately accepts the Book of Enoch as scripture, or simply values it as an important Jewish writing, its historical influence is difficult to ignore. It shaped conversations, preserved expectations, and helps modern readers better understand the religious world into which Jesus was born. That does not settle every theological debate, nor should it. But it does remind us that careful study often replaces assumptions with understanding. So we return to where we began. The Book of Enoch does not replace the Bible, nor does it tell an entirely different story. Instead, it opens a remarkable window into the hopes, questions, and expectations of ancient Judaism. It reminds us that long before Revelation, long before the Gospels, long before Christian theology developed, people were already asking, how will evil finally end? Who will judge the nations? When will justice come? And above all, can righteousness truly triumph? Those questions still matters today. If this investigation challenged assumptions, or helped you see these ancient texts in a new light, consider subscribing to the 9th tablet. Here, we don't chase sensational headlines. We follow the evidence, wherever it leads. If you enjoyed this documentary, leave a like so more people can discover it. And tell us in the comments. After reading Daniel, Enoch, and Revelation together, what surprised you the most? Because every investigation begins with one honest question. And sometimes, the oldest manuscripts still have the most fascinating answers.